Day 19 of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard defamation trial ended up quite differently from day 18. And by that, I mean, in terms of Amber Heard's case, it was a little bit of a dumpster fire in my opinion. Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, welcome to Legalbytes. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. So if you caught day 18 of this trial, you know that that was more or less, in my opinion, a good day for Amber Heard. Now, just how good of a day was up for debate, but overall, a good day for her. Now, on day 19, in my opinion, there can be really no mistaking it. This was a terrible, terrible day for the Heard legal team. Now, let me start off by backing up a little bit here. Because we are in Amber's case in chief, we have the expectation that she will put on witnesses that will essentially draw blood from Johnny, just like what happened on day 18. And so what we would expect from this is to see a shift in all of the momentum we saw in favor of Johnny's side during his case in chief in the first half of this trial. Basically, by the end of the first half of the trial, it should look like an amazing case for Johnny. And then as we hear from more witnesses on Amber's side after that point, we should start to see that balance shift back overall to Amber's side, or at the very least into a neutral zone between the two parties. Now, in order for that momentum to shift back in that direction, she has to put on some convincing witnesses telling her narrative in a way that the jury will be receptive. Ultimately, what that means is a good day for Amber right now is a day that has the ability to shift that momentum back from Johnny's side in favor of Amber. And in this case in particular, looking at Amber's case in chief after her testimony, that means witnesses that are going to convincingly corroborate her story in material ways that will basically look like she is making some wild and crazy accusations about things that Johnny did to her, but that will add some legitimacy to those accusations and show that she's not just making accusations that are crazy, that she's making accusations that are crazy and also true. Now, on the other hand, if at this point in time, the witnesses that testify don't move the needle back to Amber's side at all and don't really corroborate her story in any kind of a way, in other words, if they prove essentially neutrally beneficial testimony, that's a bad day for Amber. Keeping all of that in mind, to sum this day up, the Heard legal team brought in a bunch of witnesses who didn't really add any points to the board for their case. And at the same time, some of those witnesses ended up providing some really damaging information for Amber Heard's case, at the very least putting on good information for Johnny's case. Overall, I have to say it was a slow-moving day and tough to really slog through all of these video depositions. Specifically, we heard from Bruce Witkin, Tracy Jacobs, Joel Mandel, Adam Waldman, Detective Marie Sandinaga, Ron Schnell, Michele Mulroney, Tina Newman, Ellen Barkin, Dr. Alan Blaustein, Eric George, and Jessica Kovacevic. And the only one out of all of those witnesses to testify in a non-video deposition, meaning he testified in court and everyone else was in a video deposition slogfest, was the expert witness, Ron Schnell. Now, so that I don't waste your time, I'll go over basically just the primary things that I got out of these witnesses, and we'll only go into detail about a few of them. First, Bruce Witkin testified that he's essentially Johnny Depp's ex-brother-in-law. He said they were close for many years, but that in 2017, suddenly Johnny essentially ghosted Bruce. He says he's not really sure why, but he suspects that someone had told Johnny some kind of lies about him, and that it had something to do with testimony that he had provided, I think, during their divorce. Now, if anything, this actually seems to support Johnny's side because his life was allegedly in a tailspin around 2017 in response to Amber's DVTRO and divorce paperwork. So it's a little bit unclear as to how that is bad for Johnny that he withdrew from relationships and friendships at a time when his life was in that tailspin. Anyway, beyond that, the only thing that came out in Amber's favor here was testimony from Bruce claiming that people on Johnny's payroll don't say much for fear of upsetting Johnny. Amber's been essentially saying the same thing, but again, the witnesses are also able to evaluate the credibility of each of these witnesses as they come in front of them, and they're able to detect whether or not they think that these witnesses are overplaying their hand in any way or trying to spin things in such a way that benefits Johnny unfairly. Anyway, next we heard from Tracy Jacobs. She was Johnny's longtime former talent agent up until sometime around, I believe, 2016. To me, she seemed very bitter about being Johnny's former talent agent and not his current one, and so I definitely read a lot of bias here. She testified that he was initially not a difficult client to regulate. However, that all changed around 10 years ago when Johnny started to show up late to film sets. Now, again, similar to the timeline situation from the previous witness, this actually coincides with the time when Amber appeared in his life. So I'm not sure what the Heard legal team is trying to do with this particular witness. Finally, she was asked about Johnny's reputation in recent years. And ultimately, she said, I don't know what his reputation is since I'm no longer his talent agent, but the lawsuits don't help. In other words, she really doesn't know anything about his reputation right now because she's not involved. So how relevant is her testimony on that matter? I don't really know. But anyway, on the other hand, she confirmed that up until the time when she was fired by Johnny, she confirmed that she had never seen Johnny physically harm anyone and that she had never seen injuries on Amber. Anyway, next we heard from Joel Mandel. Joel Mandel was Johnny's business manager from 1999. Honestly, once I heard that detail, I understood that he was going to testify to Johnny's alleged financial irresponsibility. But because we know that Johnny had had a longtime business manager that he changed to a new one in 2016 after he found out that he had been essentially screwed out of something like $600 million before finally suing that previous business manager, I knew that this had to be the guy that allegedly screwed him out of that $600 million. So for me personally, it was very difficult to take anything that he had to say seriously because he undoubtedly had a very strong bias against Johnny's financial picture that seemed irreconcilable. Anyway, next we heard from Adam Waldman, and I want to save him for the end because I want to make an important point about him and his testimony. So for now, we'll skip him and go right next to Detective Marie Sandinaga. She is a detective for the LAPD who specializes in DV cases. Now, it seemed that the Heard legal team was looking for her to say that the LAPD officers who came by the penthouses on May 21st, 2016 did not follow the LAPD's policies for DV cases. But literally every policy that she elaborated on was followed by the police officers in this case, as we've heard previously through their individual testimony. As an example, she said that if there was anything that the officers saw that was suspicious, it would usually be in an incident report. And that's exactly what the police officers said in their depositions. She also said that officers are taught how to ask questions so that they draw out the right information from an alleged DV victim. But she indicated that if an alleged victim doesn't want to talk, they also can't force them to do so. Again, this tracks exactly what the police officers have already testified to. So if anything, to me, she in fact bolstered the police officer's testimony here, which in my opinion was already strong. Anyway, so next we heard from Ron Schnell, Amber's expert witness, who did an analysis of tweets and hashtags. Now, like Adam Waldman, I found some important points came out of Mr. Schnell's testimony, so I want to turn to him in substance after I finish with the rest of the witnesses I haven't yet discussed. So for now, let's move on to Michele Mulroney. She was Amber's attorney testifying about the whole prenup, postnup issue that we've heard about, which allegedly gave rise to the Australia incident. Specifically, she said that she was hired to secure a postnup for Amber. Honestly, the only thing that I really got out of this witness was that she testified that Johnny yelled at her once. I don't know, man. Pointless witness and a waste of time, in my opinion. Anyway, next we heard from Tina Newman. Tina Newman is a representative of the Disney Corporation and the witness that Disney chose to produce as their person most knowledgeable, or PMK, having to do with the subject of Johnny's termination from the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Now, the irony of identifying Miss Newman as the person most knowledgeable is that based on her answers at deposition, she knew absolutely nothing. She apparently didn't know about the op-ed, about Johnny's lawsuits, or anything else hitting the press about Johnny around that time. She said the decision to hire Johnny was above her pay grade. So she couldn't even say what the reason was for why he was even terminated. And there were no written records discussing his termination, which seems consistent with what we heard from Johnny's Hollywood expert witnesses, who talked about how unofficial Hollywood often is until a final agreement has been made by handshake and then quote unquote papered by getting written down in writing. So in my opinion, yet another pointless witness that we heard from today. Then after that, we heard from Ellen Barkin. Ellen Barkin is an actress and a previous love flame? Relationship? Not relationship? Anyway, let's get into some details to explain what I mean. Ms. Barkin very clearly revealed herself to be a very bitter woman based on the way that she was answering the questions she was. She testified that she had a history with Johnny from something around like 30 years ago. When asked about their romantic relationship, she very prominently corrected the attorney, directing her that it was very much not a romantic relationship, but a sexual relationship. She really wanted everyone to know that there was absolutely no romance involved in the things that they were doing together decades ago. She was another witness who testified that Johnny did drugs, which is of course nothing new at this point. Then Miss Barkin said he was controlling and jealous when they were together, again, like 30 years ago. And then the ultimate piece of her testimony was that one time when Johnny was angry in a hotel room, he threw a bottle across the room. Actually, not threw. She clarified that he tossed a bottle across the room, which seems softer than throwing. She stated that the bottle didn't hit her, nor did it hit anyone else, which is consistent with Johnny's testimony saying that he abuses things so that he doesn't abuse people. Again, nothing particularly new or pertinent coming from this witness, and a waste of time for the jury, and ultimately starting to look like this is the best that Amber Heard's team has. Nothing better, throwing spaghetti at the wall, probably a weak case. Anyway, next we heard from Eric George. This was the attorney who gave Amber legal counsel during the op-ed drafting process. He said that it was his role to look over the op-ed and make sure that there was nothing there that could give rise to a lawsuit between Johnny and Amber, which of course is ironic. He was totally unsuccessful because here we are. He described some of their back and forth, and honestly, again, I got nothing. I got nothing from his deposition testimony that I could really use that seemed helpful one way or another. This was, again, another witness that really brought nothing forward for anyone and wasted Amber's precious testimony minutes. Now, in addition, we also heard from Dr. Alan Blaustein, who was Johnny's psychiatrist for a long time. He talked about how Johnny had had feelings of jealousy, although he didn't remember what it was other than that it was towards Amber Heard. He talked about how Johnny, again, did a lot of drugs and alcohol. He talked about how Johnny actually didn't really even want to marry Amber in the first place. And finally, Dr. Blaustein addressed Johnny's description of what he called the devil inside him, also known as the monster. It's the thing that's been brought up time and time again. Dr. Blaustein described this as an internal chaos and pressure. It was basically the thing that Johnny was dealing with, that he was struggling with, that he was depressed and anxious over, and basically things that were harming him internally. Again, this lines up, if anything, with Johnny's testimony, with how he described the monster being the thing that harms him and no one else. So again, another witness that I don't understand why Amber's team even brought forward in the first place. Anyway, then finally we heard from Jessica Kovacevic, the last video deposition witness of the day. Thank goodness, because oh god, it was such a slog, guys. Anyway, she talked about how Amber was cast in Justice League and Aquaman 1 and 2. She testified to the point that there were online rumors about Amber getting kicked off the franchise at one point, and that she was eventually restored in her role, indicating that yes, in fact, she was kicked off at one point. When asked about what movie roles Amber had actually lost as a result of the hoax claims Adam Waldman had made in the press against her during the UK trial, she pointed to a role offered to Amber for a movie being produced by Amazon. She didn't give a name for the title because she said that the project had actually changed the name of the title since then. Now, importantly, when asked about how she knew that Amber had lost this role because of the hoax claim issue and not because of some other reason, she said that no one could ever say out loud why it was taken away. That studios were never going to go out and say it was because of the bad press. I don't know if Amber's legal team realized that this reasoning by Ms. Kovacevic is also applicable to Johnny's side's argument for how they can show he lost the role in Pirates of the Caribbean 6. So as much as that reasoning could potentially help Amber, it helps even more Johnny's side because this is an opposing party's witness that is testifying to reasoning that is very helpful for Johnny. I fully expect Johnny's legal team in closing to directly quote Amber's talent agent here for the proposition that you'll never get a studio to admit why they fired you, because that's just the way that Hollywood is, but that you know why because of the timing. So in the end, this was a witness who was maybe mildly helpful for Amber, but ultimately so much more helpful for Johnny. Okay, so now that we've gone through everyone else, let's turn back to Adam Waldman. This is Johnny's attorney who has been representing him for years, including throughout the UK trial. He is also the one who made the several statements that form the basis of Amber's counterclaims. Now, keep in mind here that unlike Johnny's case, Amber's side has to prove not only all of the elements of defamation as they relate to Waldman's statement, but also they have to prove that Johnny can be held responsible for someone else's statements. In other words, they have to prove something called vicarious liability. So the whole reason why Waldman was deposed here was so that Amber's team could try to get that link between Waldman's statement and Johnny. However, in order to prove vicarious liability here, you have to get that information about the communications between Johnny and Adam Waldman. And as the jury saw here, basically nothing came in with Waldman because about 99% of the questions that were asked in this deposition had to do with communications between Johnny and Waldman, which are precisely the kind of questions that fall under the protection of the attorney-client privilege. This is one of the most ironclad privileges that you can get in litigation, and there are so many good reasons for that. Now, the judicial system has every interest in maintaining as robust a relationship between the attorney and the client. And so it wants to encourage the client to feel as protected as possible in revealing everything that they possibly can that is relevant to their case to their attorney, knowing that it's never going to come back to haunt them. So it is absolutely proper that Waldman did not answer any of those questions having to do with his communications between him and his client. That is not even something that he could answer because of the fact that he is not the one that owns that privilege. Johnny does. So if anyone is going to waive that privilege, it has to be Johnny. And it is well within Johnny's right to decide not to waive that privilege. Now, note that this was completely predictable. There's just not a snowball's chance in hell that Amber's side was going to get that information that they needed out of him because of the attorney-client privilege. And in the end, just as anyone could probably predict, they got nothing. The jury at this point really has no evidence in front of them to evaluate Amber's counterclaims. The only way that they can watch Waldman's deposition and conclude in favor of Amber on those facts is if they misunderstand the significance of the attorney-client privilege and think that somehow Johnny is hiding something or that Waldman is hiding his testimony behind the attorney-client privilege. Not to suggest that Johnny and Waldman are somehow hiding pertinent information behind the attorney-client privilege would be incredibly improper. And if there are any news headlines or articles that suggest that, I would vehemently lambast all of those. And realistically, Amber's team cannot make that argument in court because, again, that would be incredibly improper. So all of that is to say that because they can't get Waldman's information because of this privilege, no reasonable jury would find in Amber on her counterclaims with the evidence that they are going to end up with. No reasonable jury would find that way because in order to get there, they would have to misunderstand the attorney-client privilege. It is absolutely unreasonable for them to use that as reasoning for a conclusion in Amber's favor. And note that the argument about no reasonable jury could find in Amber's favor is exactly the argument that is needed for a motion to strike Amber's counterclaims. And this is something that Johnny's team will have an opportunity to do once Amber's team rests her case in chief. And in my opinion, Johnny's team has probably the strongest case that I personally have ever seen for a motion to strike the defendant's counterclaims. Now, that's not to say that I'm predicting that Johnny's team will actually win in a motion to strike her counterclaims, but I am very animated because, like I said, it is the closest that someone I think possibly can get. So now let's turn to the very last witness, Ron Schnell, Amber's hashtag witness. And before that, I'm going to close the drapes. Okay, that's a little bit better. So probably the most interesting thing that I saw that came out of his testimony here was the fact that he never went to college because he was essentially some kind of a child wunderkind who went straight from teenagerhood into a graduate degree program and then eventually working at Bell Labs. And maybe this just speaks to my level of familiarity with the real life Bell Labs and the amount of times that it actually comes up in my life. But the moment that he named it, I don't know if anyone else is thinking this too, but I thought of Midge Maisel's dad in Amazon's The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Totally random, has nothing to do with the case, but my brain went there, so I figured I would share. I don't know. Anyway, the crux of the testimony here was to say that essentially after Adam Waldman's statements that were made to the press about the whole hoax thing, there were hashtag campaigns that appeared on the internet that indicated people were targeting Amber and supporting Johnny. Mr. Schnell talked about the Justice for Johnny hashtag, the Amber Turd hashtag, and a group of others. And he explained to the jury with a chart that the hashtags have increasingly grown in use and over time since the summer of 2020. He also testified that the hashtags used always indicate positive or negative tweets about Amber. The Justice for Johnny hashtag, as an example, always indicates a positive tweet for Johnny Depp, according to Mr. Schnell. And the Amber Turd hashtag, as another example, always indicates a negative tweet for Johnny Depp. And the Amber Turd hashtag, as another example, always indicates a negative tweet for Amber Heard, again, according to Mr. Schnell. Now, the cross-examination of Mr. Schnell was messy, but the Depp legal team got some good information out of him nonetheless. I do wish that they would have clarified that the use of hashtags is not always indicative of the substance of the tweet. In other words, you could totally use an Amber Turd hashtag and a Justice for Johnny Depp hashtag in the same thing, only to garner attention from other people that are using that hashtag to enter into the conversation and debate with other people. Anyway, that was the downside of the cross-examination, was the fact that they didn't end up getting that kind of cleaned up for Johnny's side. But I'm actually a little bit less worried about that because the jury tends to be a bit younger, and we also have heard from folks that are in the courtroom that are watching the jury that seem to indicate people's responses indicate that they understand Twitter quite a bit. They understand the process of getting kicked off of Twitter. They understand probably a lot of these hashtag contexts as well. A lot of people these days use Twitter. So the idea that they are going to be more familiar with it is a little bit more likely than some of these other things that experts will have testified to in this trial. But anyway, aside from that, on the plus side, Johnny's attorney, Mr. Dennison, also got the witness to repeat over and over again those hashtags that have been swirling around online increasingly over the last couple of years, which is exactly the kind of thing that the jury is not allowed to investigate on their own. Every single day when the court dismisses the jury, the judge says, you're not allowed to go online. You're not allowed to go on social media. You're not allowed to watch the news. Don't investigate the case. Don't look for anything independent outside of this case. And yet Amber's side decides to bring in an expert witness who is going to testify to exactly all of the kind of information that the jury is likely to come across if they were to do their own independent investigation. This is kind of a microcosm of a lot of self-owns that are happening coming out of Amber Heard's team. And I don't understand why they decided to even use this guy in the first place. Anyway, at the end of the day, Judge Oscarati revealed how much time each side had left for testimony. As a reminder, she said at the beginning of this trial that each side needed to track themselves carefully because if at the end one side ran out of time while the other side still had some time, she would not give the side that ran out of time any extra time. They would have to sit down, be quiet, and let the other side finish. And at the end of day 19 here, Judge Oscarati said that Amber's team has 8 hours and 14 minutes left for both directing their remaining witnesses and for cross-examining the rebuttal witnesses that Johnny's team ultimately decides to bring forward. And at the same time, Judge Oscarati said that Johnny's team has a full 18 hours and 30 minutes left to cross-examine Amber's witnesses and to direct their own rebuttal witnesses, which means that there is a 10-hour difference between how much time each side has. Going into rebuttals, this is a massive advantage for Johnny Depp's side. Looking at the spread, there is actually a decent chance that Amber's team could run out of time before the Depp legal team puts forward their first rebuttal witness. This further means that Johnny's side could do a direct examination of a rebuttal witness, and then Amber's side wouldn't have the ability to cross-examine at all. And then Johnny's side also didn't have to use any of that allocated time on any redirects, which ultimately means Johnny's side could then, in rebuttal, put on witness after witness after witness that gets entirely unanswered by Amber's side. Not only would the Depp legal team have the last say here because of the rebuttal process, but it would be entirely unanswered by the other side just because of the way that Amber's team has used their time. Now, I'll leave you with this possible image. Amber's side runs out of time, and Johnny's side still has a few hours left. Kate Moss gets brought up as a rebuttal witness to talk about rumors of the stairs incident that Amber had brought up during her direct examination. And then she dispels the rumors and says that Johnny has never been anything but amazing to her, and that even though they're no longer together, she still has a very warm place in her heart for him because he's such a wonderful person. Mic drop, game set, check, mate. However you want to put it, that would be an amazing way for Johnny's side to cap off this trial. And it would ultimately be the last nail in the coffin for Amber's case. Now, of course, now that I just went ahead and said that in a very excited way, I also don't know exactly what the Depp legal team has in store for the rebuttal, and I can't guarantee that the timing is actually going to work out the way that I've described. We don't know if Amber's side has only one witness left or several witnesses left, and so we don't really know how the timing is going to end up at the point at which she rests her case in chief. But the mere fact that we're talking about a real possibility that this is actually how this trial could end up is absolutely insane. But did you see today's testimony? If you did, I would love to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you found this interesting or at least informative. And if you did, I would love it if you would hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded and so you can join us for day 20 of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard defamation trial, live streamed right here on this channel. I messed that up. I messed it up. Anyway, see you in the next video.